Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW Slamboree 1998. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Fit Finlay versus Chris Benoit. I thought this was a good match to start Slamboree 1998. Back and forth matchup between Finlay and Benoit, with Finlay keeping the pace of the match. Booker T makes his way down to the ring. Finlay then capitalizes on that, hits a tombstone on Benoit, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Fit Finlay. Hats off to Fit Finlay for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Lex Luger versus Bryan Adams. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Lex and Adams, with Lex keeping the pace of the match. Lex then hits a power slam on Bryan Adams in the middle of the ring. Adams then gets up, hits a devastating pile driver on Lex as well. But Lex ultimately applies his signature torture rack on Bryan Adams. And your winner of the match by submission is Lex Luger. Hats off to Lex Luger for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a Cruiserweight Battle Royal. It is Super Calo, Chavo Guerrero, Ciclope, Damien, El Dandy, El Grillo, Juventud Guerrera, Marty Jannetty, Billy Kidman, Evan Courageous, Lenny Lane, Psychosis, Silver King, Johnny Swinger, and Villano 4 in this Battle Royal. The match itself was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup. Guerrera and Ciclope were the last two competitors in the Battle Royal. Guerrera then somehow eliminates himself. Ciclope is the last person in the ring. Ciclope ends up unmasking himself, and it turns out to be Dean Malenko, and Malenko ultimately wins the Cruiserweight Battle Royal. And because Malenko won that Battle Royal, he's a new #1 contender for the Cruiserweight Championship, which gets us into our next match. It's an impromptu match. It is Dean Malenko versus Chris Jericho for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. I thought this was a good matchup, back and forth matchup between Malenko and Jericho, with Malenko keeping the pace of the match. Jericho then hits a lion salt on Malenko for a near fall, but Malenko gets up, applies his signature Texas Cloverleaf on Jericho, and your winner of the match, and at that time new WCW Cruiserweight Champion, is Dean Malenko. Hats off to Dean Malenko for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a Bowery death match. It is DDP versus Raven. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between DDP and Raven, with Raven keeping the pace of the match. The Flock make their way out to the ring. Van Hammer then attacks the Flock. Security members then attack DDP, which, come to find out, some of the members of the security that were by the ring were actually members of the Flock. Raven then hits his signature DDT on Diamond Dallas Page, as well as DDP's Diamond Cutter. But DDP somehow gets up, hits the Diamond Cutter on Raven, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is DDP. Hats off to DDP for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Eddie Guerrero versus Ultimo Dragon. I thought this was a great matchup. Back and forth matchup between Guerrero and the Dragon, with Guerrero keeping the pace of the match. Dragon then lands multiple kicks on Guerrero in the middle of the ring, with Dragon hitting an Acai moonsault on Guerrero as well. Dragon then applies a Dragon Sleeper on Guerrero, but the hold is quickly broken. Guerrero then hits a Brainbuster on the Dragon, and then Guerrero ultimately hits his signature Frog Splash off the top rope, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Eddie Guerrero. Hats off to Eddie Guerrero for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW United States Championship. It is Goldberg versus Saturn. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Goldberg and Saturn, with Goldberg keeping the pace of the match. Saturn then hits an exploder suplex on Goldberg, but Goldberg gets up, hits a spear on Saturn, and then ultimately hits his signature jackhammer on Saturn, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Goldberg. Hats off to Goldberg for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Eric Bischoff versus Vince McMahon. This match actually didn't happen. Bischoff made his way out to the ring with the referee. Referee's doing a 10 count, and Bischoff ultimately gets the win in this matchup. It was more or less a publicity stunt for WCW and Eric Bischoff, with Eric challenging Vince McMahon to a match at Slamboree. Vince obviously never showed up, but they got a lot of eyeballs on the product because some people probably out there at that time in 1998 thought that Vince was actually going to show up at Slamboree in 1998 to go, challenge Eric Bischoff to a professional wrestling match, which, I mean, if it would have happened back then, it would have been absolutely awesome, but obviously it didn't happen. But it made for a great moment, and Eric Bischoff ended up getting the win due to a countout, so hats off to Eric Bischoff for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Randy Savage versus Bret Hart with special guest referee Roddy Piper. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Savage and Hart, with Hart keeping the pace of the match. Randy then hits an elbow drop for a near fall. Hart then applies a sharpshooter, but Randy counters. Miss Elizabeth makes her way out to the ring. Hart then attacks Piper. Hogan then attacks Randy, which allows Hart to apply a sharpshooter on Randy Savage. And your winner of the match is Bret Hart. Hats off to Bret Hart for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW Slamboree 1998. It is the Outsiders versus the Giant and Sting for the WCW Tag Team Championships. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between the Outsiders and Giant and Sting, with the Outsiders keeping the pace of the match. Hall then hits a devastating chokeslam on Sting. Sting then gets up, hits a Stinger Splash on Scott Hall. Hall then hits Nash with the title. Giant then goes for the cover, pins for the 3. And your winners of the match are Giant and Sting. Hats off to Giant and Sting for getting the win in this matchup. A couple of things I'm going to say about Slamboree 1998 before I get out of here, man. Number one, solid event. Solid event from top to bottom. Opening matchup, you got Finlay versus Benoit for the television championship. The Cruiserweight Battle Royal I thought was awesome. A lot of great competitors in that match, but I really like the ending of that match with Ciclope unmasking and then being Dean Malenko, which I thought was cool. Malenko versus Jericho for the Cruiserweight Championship was a solid match. The Bowery Death match, or Death Cage match, was also awesome between DDP and Raven. Solid matchup. Guerrero versus Dragon, I thought was one of the best matches on this card. Thought it was a great match. Honestly, one of the biggest moments of the entire pay-per-view was Eric Bischoff. I think Eric challenging Vince McMahon to come to WCW and challenge him in a match at Slamboree in 1998. I mean, if it would have happened, like I stated earlier, it would have been absolutely insane if Vince, walked down that ramp, in ring attire and wanted to wrestle Eric Bischoff, in a WCW pay-per-view. But obviously it didn't happen. I mean, a dream match, sure, at that time, of course, because at that point, WCW was competing with, WWE at the time. And I mean, with the Attitude Era at that time, I mean, anybody thought, anything could have happened really at that point because the Attitude Era was so insane with what Vince and WWE were doing at that time that, a lot of people probably at that time were like, you know what, I wouldn't be surprised if Vince didn't show up tonight to challenge Eric Bischoff to a match. But it was a great moment. It really was. It was a really cool moment. And then the main event, Outsiders versus Giant and Sting for the WCW Tag Team Championships. It was a solid match. One of the biggest takeaways I took from that match was Hall turning his back on Kevin Nash and hitting Nash with the WCW Tag Team Championships to allow Giant and Sting to become victorious in that match and win the WCW Tag Team Championships. But, this was something where obviously Hall and Nash were, going their own way, and Nash wanted to be a part of, Hall wanted to be a part of the, black and white NWO brand, the original NWO brand on his own. And then Kevin Nash kind of wanted to make the NWO Wolfpack. And this was, a great way for them to kind of do their own thing and, have an, internal war, if you will, between NWO White and Black and NWO Wolfpack. So it made for a great storyline, man, with you got, Hall leading NWO Black and White with Hogan and stuff like that. Then you have Nash with the NWO Wolfpack, man. It made for a lot of good matches for WCW back in 1998, 1999. So, but all in all, it was a solid card, like I said. And just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of a 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW Slamboree 1998 a solid rating of a 6, 6.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW Slamboree 1998. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.